All right, everybody, it is Monday again, so it's a special episode. Might be a couple special episodes coming up. So this marks the beginning of some guest speakers that we're going to have on, Beyond the Mask. And instead of trying to set that up here, what we're going to do is we're going to cut to the title screen and we're going to get right into it. So get ready. We have a guest here today. So I'm going to do an intro. This is Dr. Drew Smith. Dr. Drew Smith and I have known each other for a while now, but we will give him a formal introduction. He is a professor of management in clinical human psychology. He is based in the, I'll say, greater Detroit, Michigan area. And so let me make sure I get this right. And I'm going to go through in order from lowest to highest degrees. So
Oh,
you have a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from
yes,
Rochester Christian University, correct?
yes, correct.
You also, and I'll say this is why I've been salivating to get you on and have this conversation. And you have a master's degree in Jungian and archetypal psychology, and that is from the Pacifica Graduate Institute,
Yep,
correct?
correct.
Yes. And last and certainly not least, you also have a doctorate of philosophy in Jungian and archetypal psychology. That is also from Pacifica Graduate Institute, where you got a 4.0
Yes.
on which, so
Thank
kudos
you.
to you. And if you don't mind, I'll say your dissertation topic was reimagining masculinity, the sacred masculine archetype as revealed in four cultural artifacts.
Correct.
Correct?
That's
Okay.
it.
So with that, and I'll say, and you are a proud father and husband. So I certainly don't want to, have that be light. I'll say, I think sometimes our personal lives are more important than our professional, frankly. So, but today we'll get into, we'll see how much we'll get into personal today, because you and I have had conversations about this. So I'll say, to kind of set the stage for viewers. So obviously the channel is based off of Burn the Script. Within Burn the Script, I have some sections on archetypal. Specifically, there's a chapter called The Shadow in the C-Suite. Okay. So with that, I'll say some folks, people who know me personally, kind of are a little surprised because they view me as a tech geek, like I'm super STEM, all these things. And when I start to get into these types of topics, they kind of sometimes they get surprised. So, what I'll say, let's start off with this first question. And I think this is probably one that, in my opinion, is probably one of the most important, especially for business and tech leaders. Okay. A lot of the times, business and tech leaders, it's high stakes, right? So, we're focusing on KPIs, we're focusing on things like control, logic, measurable outcomes. And then that's what we have to work to, right? That's what dominates our conversations and our focus. But here's the question I would have, and I would look to you to say, hey, how would you frame this? What would you recommend to introduce Jungian psychology to these high stakes business and tech leaders? And how should they see or start to consider, the unconscious, and what kind of benefits might that bring to them?
It's a big question.
I know. You can carve that up however you want.
Yeah, we should carve that up a little bit. I will say, I think Jung he's been around for over 100 years, right? He's been kind of pushed to the background, to the sidelines. I've all long considered my degree as kind of like the redheaded stepchild of psychology. We are the area of psychology that people fear to tread because it's more, not, I won't say subjective, but it is less clinical. It's not clinical, right? We are looking at phenomenology. We're looking at the lived experience. We're looking at the mystery of life and what it means to be human. And I think the minute we move away or forget that there is something human in each of us, no matter how robotic we want to be or how AI driven we want to be, we are humans at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So through that perspective, the temple at Delphi said, know thyself, right? That's what emblazoned over the top of it. In order, you have to know yourself. There are tons and tons of professional developers who will give you all sorts of personality tests and all sorts of, ways to step into and understand who you are. But more often than not, I would say leaders are way too busy to sit in silence with themselves. And when
Mm,
we do that, we end up And that's sit in silence with yourself, right? Not in,
Yeah.
just not blank mind, but I mean, like really pondering who you are, what you're here for, those questions that are gnawing at us in the back of our brains we don't like to think about. I would say a lot of leaders tend to rush past the things that are uncomfortable. We tend to solve problems immediately. We don't like the discomfort. We don't like the tension of sitting in not knowing who we are or what's going on. We would rather just plow ahead because we see that as a sign of weakness, maybe, or
Okay.
we see it as a sign of a lack of intelligence or lack of knowledge, whatever it is. There's this fear underlying many of us. We're just afraid to be alone with ourselves because we've never sat long enough to understand who we are and to incorporate the things that we like about ourselves and the things we don't, right? To bring them to surface, right? And we're talking about the shadow a little bit. That's kind of the shadow energy. We don't like the shadow energy, but yet it's so pervasive all over the
Yeah.
place. When we go and don't acknowledge the shadow, it comes out in really terrible ways, right? So I
Can
would
we?
say,
I'm sorry. Can we pause there for a moment? Because
yeah,
I think that, like, well, I'll say first, I'm gonna sideline a little bit. So I'll say I think like to me the penultimate version of the shadow, right? So the Batman to Bruce Wayne, right? So
yes,
anyway, I had to pause there for a minute.
yeah, a great
Um,
analogy, right?
but you made a comment about like when we don't deal with the shadow, it comes out,
Yeah.
right? It comes out in sometimes really bad ways. Okay. So obviously based off of your training and what you've done research in and what you've seen, and because I know you're teaching a lot of in this arena as well.
Mhm.
Can you provide maybe some tangible examples that you know from your research or you've actually seen personally, like where you're like, hey, that's clearly their shadow archetype is like just took over.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, I mean, I can say me, right? I'll use me as an
Okay.
example. That's the best.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
fine.
there are over this journey that I've had in my life and getting these degrees and understanding things. There's always um, an underlying question that I seek to gain knowledge on, right? And a lot of that does wrap up in who am I? Who am I meant to be? And how do the things in the past affect me in a negative way, right?
Yep.
Because we live time sequentially, even though it is, it's very fluid and flux and all of those things. We experience time sequentially, and the things that happened to me a long time ago will rear their heads up if I'm not paying attention to it. So, for example, let's see, shadow. Okay, here's a good one. I grew up trying to be so my to get transparent, my parents split when I was 4. That was a hard thing for me. I was an only child, and I someone at that time said to me as a 4-year-old, "You're now the man of the house." Right? Which is a lot of pressure to put on a 4-year-old because, my dad was gone. And that then set a precedence for me saying, okay, I'm the man of the house. I need to show up in a certain way. But I didn't feel that certain way. That certain way was not comfortable for me. It wasn't something, and at 4,
Yeah.
obviously, I have no ability to do any of that. But even as I grew older, trying to figure out what it means to be the man of the house in my own house, it went a little haywire for a while. I
Sure.
turned around from that. I ran from that. I did everything I could to evade how to show up as a man in my house, right? Because I didn't even know what it was to be a man, to be honest. And all of that shoved into that shadow aspect. There were parts of me that I didn't like or that I was not accepting of. And because I shoved it down, right? We all pack it down. That's what guys do. Shove it away. It tends to bubble out. You lose your cool, you lose your mind at something really stupid. One of my kids will spill something on the floor, and I will just, if I'm not aware of the shadow and how I'm showing up, I'll blow up at my kids. And I'll like it's the end of the world. And they just spilled some water. Who cares? But because I'm
Yeah.
not paying attention to who I am and where I'm from and how all of those things combine to create me, it I'm not self-aware enough to say, wait a minute, don't get upset because I know you want your kid to be perfect. He's not going to be perfect. This is a little deal. don't turn it into a big deal, right? And that's my shadow coming out saying, you know what, my house has to be perfect. It has to fit in a certain structure or look a certain way. To me, that would be the way that I've experienced it the most. Or, I run away from responsibilities. Before we had kids, like I didn't want to get a real job. I wanted to, I wanted to be the puer, as Jung would call it, right? That's the archetype of the Peter Pan, right? It's just constant play all the time. There's no grounding there. My shadow showed up there. And for a long time, the things that I was doing, I was trying to hide it from a lot of other people because I was very embarrassed by it, right? So
Okay.
I would say the shadow will creep out of you when you least expect it, especially when it's high tension, high stress, high temperature in the room. So
Yeah.
for leaders, especially, I think that's a way the shadow side of ourselves, unless we're willing to deal with it, will erupt at some point in time. And unless we're cognizant of it and working on it consciously, we'll bypass that whole process. And people will say, man, what a prick. And we'll be like, well, so what? Right? Because we're just showing up and it's our shadow. It's not the humane way to show up in the world.
Can
Is that,
let's yeah, that's perfect. Let's I want to unpack it a little. I want to unpack it in a slightly different direction if you don't mind.
yeah, please.
And so and of course I mean I'm going to use personal reference as well because I think it's easy to kind of pick on and assimilate and discuss ourselves. So one of the things I would say that for me that I've learned over time, so yes, I'll say I would fully confirm your statement like guys pack it away. We like bury it. We pretend it's not there, oh, you can't show emotions, you can't do this, you can't do
Right.
that. There's a lot of things that happen. And then like it ultimately, to me, it's kind of like it's kind of like a volcano that it just keeps building pressure
Mhm.
and the pressure is escalating. And then at some point it just erupts. And then it like makes things immensely worse than it needs to be. So like one of the things I would bring up and I like to kind of lean into is I have noticed that typically when I am tired, and so
Mhm.
it's not just high stakes,
Right.
it's a when I'm exhausted, when I'm getting burnout on the day or something like that. So when those psychological mechanisms are weaker,
Yeah.
that's when that shadow can just like boom,
Right.
here it is.
Yeah.
And would you agree with that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I would say Jung, the way he structured the self, the identity, you're right, who you are. There's this nucleus of the self, capital. Well, there's the small s self, and then there's the large s self. But around that goes a mask, right? A persona. That's who we
Yeah.
show up as to other people. Now, there's
Yep.
the us that's back at home, but then there's the one that we present to other people. Right behind that is your shadow. So when you get a
Okay.
crack in that facade, that shadow will pop forth, right? Or if you're just totally unaware, ultra tired, we don't have the defenses to put our persona up anymore, right? So
Do
we'll slip into that.
do you so I'll say as we talk about this, it dawned on me. Do we want to take a minute and maybe get into like the conscious mind and then the unconscious mind and kind of maybe how those interplay with each other a little bit? We don't have to do a super deep dive because I think some of the folks, I'll say for me, as much as I like logic and objectivity and things like that, I mean, that's a place I tend to be more comfortable with. I also have a different side too, but I will say, and you and I have had personal conversations like some of
Right,
my active imagination stuff, which
right.
we'll see how much I share here today. And it has been tremendously influential for me, is what I will say. But do you want to maybe explain that for the viewers so they kind of understand like what was Jung really proposing like between the
Sure.
conscious and the unconscious and why that's so important?
Right, sure. So we got to take a little trip back in time, right? Jung and Freud were buddies, right? More than buddies. Freud saw Jung as the next savior of psychology. He was the up and coming guy. He was the guy that was going to take the reins and was going to run with Freud's theories and really make psychoanalysis become a thing, right? It was going to be this was the next thing. Jung and Freud got into a little bit of a rift about the unconscious, right? So Freud
Okay.
Freud focused more on the subconscious. That's kind of the things that we repress that are within our wheelhouse. It's within our brain. It's the individual more than anything else, right? So we've got our
Okay.
conscious mind, which is what we use on a daily basis. Our thoughts, our emotions, even those are conscious, right? We walk how we walk through the world every day. That's our conscious waking life. Freud saw a subconscious, which so conscious here, subconscious here. The subconscious would be the things that we repress, the things that we look at from our past, and we're a little bit, with the shadow aspect, right? Just some the deviance and the taboos. That was very Freudian, right? He was very much into sex and how sex affects us, right? Jung saw that and said, yeah, but there's got to be more. There has to be more because I'm looking through humanity. And no matter, time, culture, place, there are things that there are symbols that are representative throughout all of history and humanity that bind us together, that draw us together. And that's what Jung called these archetypes, right? So archetypes are just patterns of living, patterns of ways that life unfolds, right? We know love is an archetype. We could say, the wise old man is an archetype. You have a visual in your head of what that means, right? So these are reoccurring patterns that transcend time, space, culture, age, etc. Jung believed that there was a collective unconscious, kind of like I would liken it to a river underneath the mantle of the earth, right? That you can drop down into, that is pervasive throughout all of culture and time, and within that collective unconscious are images and experiences and connecting points that really help us to draw forth on our humanity, right? This is where symbols take on a life of their own. They become more than just signs. They are symbols that help guide you into another place or another space. So the rift happened between Jung and Freud was not very nice to Jung and really got upset.
Okay.
So that's why we see a lot of Freudian in our culture. We've had a lot of years of Freud, and Jung was kind of pushed away and seen as a madman or a mystic or someone who's way too into the spiritual, right? Into the mystical.
Sure.
And again, psychology doesn't like that so much. It's very uncomfortable there. We like our quantitative methods, right? we enjoy that. Behavioral, we can do that. ABA, what is it? Cognitive, all of that stuff, right? Freud had a push in that. Jung, though, was sitting on the back end and saying, but there's something that connects us as humans. And that's where he found his interest, along with how religion shapes us, or I should say spirituality shapes us, how our culture shapes us, how our family history and family dynamics shape us. All of that is stored kind of in the collective unconscious. We can liken it to, if you see mushrooms, right? Mushrooms have mycelium all throughout underground, right? And they go up for miles and miles and miles. You can have a mushroom pop up in one person's yard and is connected underground to someone else's yard, right?
Yep.
Same fungus, but just very different locations. That's kind of how Jung interpreted the collective unconscious. There are these pockets or these holes where we see the collective unconscious coming forth. And it doesn't have to, the connecting points don't necessarily happen consciously, right, in your waking life, but underneath all of that, there's
Sure.
that connectedness.
Is there in the Jungian view, is there a version of your personal unconscious?
Mm.
Is that it? So like there's
Yeah.
Which is that where, like you had referenced, like, hey, when you were 4, this event happened, it kind of embedded this. I think you've used the phrase complexity, an event, which then creates complexity around that particular item. That's part of our personal unconscious, right?
Yeah. Right.
So there's at least a couple layers within that
Yes.
unconscious, right?
Right. And you brought up the word, I forgot the word. Hold on.
Complexities?
The complexes, yes, complexes.
The complexes, yeah.
This is so archetypes and complexes are something that Jung really dove into. So an archetype we know is a universal pattern that shows up. A complex is an emotionally charged event, something that happens around an archetypal experience. Okay, so let's say you have, we'll go back to my parents getting divorced. Okay. And this guy's telling me, now you're the man of the house. So in my 4-year-old mind, even, I understand what man of the house means. But even as a 4-year-old, there are these higher, more archetypal experiences of like either the caring father or the wounding father, or, even look at divinity, right? We've got the angry God, we've got the loving God, we've got God, complex, all of those things. At every when we have these highly charged emotional experiences, like I did when I was 4, there's always an archetypal core that's sitting in the middle of that. And all of our
Okay.
experiences just kind of wrap around it and not up around it. Okay. So I would argue that maybe our personal unconscious deals with those complexes. It deals with the pain and the anger and the hurt, and complexes can be positive as well, but we often focus on the negative ones, right? So it consciously to know that we're in the throes of a complex, to know that a complex has been constellated, meaning it shows up, that's when we lose our cool. That's when we blow up for something where the reaction we have doesn't match the situation at hand, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Road rage is a great example, right? Someone,
yeah,
they cut you off in traffic. Whoops, sorry, that's terrible. But then people lose their minds, right?
yeah.
That's that reinforcement of this archetypal core that something is triggering it, right? Something is saying, hey, what just happened reminds me of what happened to me when I was in a certain place, date, time, where all of this started to build and grow, right? And unless we deal with these complexes, they just continue to escalate and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's how I think we get into the point where we're at now culturally, where people are saying, you know what, it's okay to shoot people and to say terrible things about other people. There's just this cultural complex that has blown up where we reinforce this negative nucleus, all right? Or we see it as negative. It's just, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, no, I'm with you. The interesting thing is that, or I'll say the thing I'd like to kind of, I don't know if I should say poke a little bit on
Yeah.
is, you know, the question I would have, and obviously I'm semi-referencing, semi-referencing personal experience is like, how does somebody like, would you agree with this statement? I think that if all of a sudden you notice, or this person always says this and I lose my garbage, or they always do these certain things and I don't understand why I get so mad about it,
Mhm.
right? Is
Yeah.
that's a complex firing off with an archetype, is that not correct?
Correct. Yep, that's
Okay.
correct.
Yeah. So as a leader, so because I want to bring this back to like, because
Yes,
I know
yes.
you and I can get it into a ton of,
Yeah.
and we probably will. We'll probably get into a lot of different discussions. I'll peel back a little bit on my shadow. I'm not going to get into it too much because I will say I know in the past when I've talked about my shadow has not been happy about it in the next session is what I will say. So, which is kind of funny, but where I was going to go with that is as a leader, I like how you started off the conversation that a lot of the time, we're in a world where we got to perform, we got to look a certain way. I think social media has made that worse. Like I
Mhm.
have to present this perfect performance and things like
Mhm.
that. Like, I'm using phrases like kill the leadership theater. It's like, listen, learn how to be authentic.
Right.
Leadership isn't a performance. It's about authenticity. You will make mistakes, but I like what you keyed in on in that you were like, we don't sit with ourselves and we don't learn to know ourselves, right? So if someone's spending time, so let's say they're like, hey, I want to understand Jungian psychology a little bit better. I want to start working on like what are archetypes? What are, maybe I'll explore this. The what would you say is the benefits as you start to get into like, oh, I'm starting to discover, yeah, that Dave Schippers, he rubs me the wrong way. Just he can walk in the room and I want to punch him in the face, right?
Mhm.
Like he doesn't even have to say anything. He just walks in the room and I'm like, I just want to punch him in the face, right? Which is probably an archetype firing off, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Something's
there's
going
definitely a
on.
complex coming
Yeah,
up.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
for sure.
complex. So, but if I start to work on that, what would Jung say is if you start to work on the complexes and you start to look like, hey, I'm actually going to try to use active imagination and start to address some of these potential issues. What was his comments on what are the benefits of that process?
Oh, well, his comments, I don't specifically, like I can't quote him, but I
Yeah,
would say that,
in
yeah,
general,
in
yeah.
general, he would definitely say, it's a chance to become more authentic, right? Jung was very much about the phrase went away from me, but it's where you become integrated, right? You become a whole person.
Individuation.
Yeah, individuation.
Individuation.
Thank you very
Yes. Yeah,
much.
you're
Yes.
welcome.
He's very much into individuation, right? And you can't do that if you've got this underlying, bubbling, seething cesspool of stuff that you're not willing to go through, right? So when you walk in the room and instantly my blood boils and I feel my tension rise and my
Yeah.
ringing in my ears and the anger and whatever it is, instead of taking it out on you, my first reaction needs to be, okay, what the heck is going on here? Right? Step back
Yep.
and get curious. The minute we get curious about those feelings and those emotions and why they're there, we can begin to unpack that complex that has been constellated, right? We peel back the layer by layer and it goes very far down, right? So,
Sure.
you walk in the room and instead of me immediately staying in my conscious mind and being like, that Schippers, he's such a prick, right? Instead of that, I can stop and say, wait a minute, when have I felt this way before? Right? When was another
Yeah.
time where the feeling tone that I have right now was the same? But let me go back like when I was in high school, when I was in junior high, when I was in middle school, right? When I was in
Sure.
grade school, when I was a kid, what the same feeling I have right now, what was going on then? Right? Because we can
Yeah.
usually
Yeah.
trace that back if we sit long enough. So
Sure.
Jung would say, sit with that for a little while. Doing that will help you uncover those layers of your complexes, right? And the more you begin to unpack that, suddenly that emotional charge dissipates. And curiosity
Yeah.
really helps with that, right? Getting curious not at the other person, but at yourself. What is it about that other person that sets me off? Maybe you walk in the room and you look just like my dad and unconsciously you look like my dad. You've got a goatee, maybe like my dad had, and
Yeah.
suddenly I'm triggered. And because somehow when I was a young child, I equated that goatee with this power structure, and suddenly you're this authoritarian figure that I don't get along with, and all of this is unconscious because I'm not sitting with it long enough to sit there, right? So when I bring it into
Yeah.
consciousness, I can say, oh, okay, I'm being triggered, right? And we love that word trigger these days, right? I'm being
Yeah. Yeah.
triggered uh, by Skipper's face. Okay, that's not Skipper's problem. That's my problem. So I've got to
Yeah.
unpack that. Why am I being triggered by that? What happened when I was a child that brought me to a place of such intense anger, or frustration, or fear, whatever those core emotions are, right?
All right, everybody, we're going to wrap up this week's episode here. We're going to pause. There's a lot more that Dr. Drew Smith and I talk about concerning Jungian archetypes, the shadow, some of the other archetypes as well. Hopefully you're finding this useful. We're going to continue the conversation in next week's episode. With that, we're going to call that a wrap for today and hope you enjoy your week. Hope to see you next Monday. Have a good one.